I think the heuristic, I think the mental gimmick of how would you vote, right? Which is this like perfectly legitimate question. But it's a legitimate question. It's also a bit of a debater's trick, insofar as it reduces a complex argument to a binary. And some people think that's what it does. The reason why I say I don't care about my vote is because I think that once you start saying, okay, and so you should vote for so-and-so, it psychologically puts you on this path, as I'm talking about as a writer, as an intellectual, as a pundit, whatever you want to say, trying to defend your vote rather than making the arguments that you want to make. It's a subtle form of sort of intellectual corruption to sort of make your vote central to how you look at things. In my opinion, different people have different opinions. That's fine. It's sort of like, and I've run into this a few times, and I try not to make this mistake, but every now and then I'll make predictions, right? And the problem with predictions, you can feel it in real time. I'm not alone on this. If you make a prediction, particularly if you make a bold prediction and you and say, you know, mark it down, you start looking for reassurances that your prediction is going to be right. You start trying to make your prediction, you start trying to help your prediction become reality. And this is what I was getting at about like this, you know, hypothetical of what if everybody all of a sudden started listening to you, how would that change your writing? If you think about things as your vote, it's not that thinking about your vote is wrong. It's perfectly right. It's part of citizenship. It's part of civic participation. That's fine. When I say I don't care about my vote in the context of these arguments, is that what people are trying to do to me when they say, okay, well, how are you going to vote? Is what they're trying to do is say, if I vote one way, that reveals that, oh, I'm just for the other team. And if I say I'm going to vote for my team, then they say, well, then you really don't think that these objections are all that important. And I find that it's just as a matter of argumentation, as a matter of debate, as a matter of thinking through one's positions on things, to obsess about how you're going to vote is a huge distraction. It's a huge cul-de-sac. It's a trap in a lot of ways where you fall into the terms of the debate that the people who hate your position want you to fall into. And since I've never lived anywhere where my vote matters, I'm not saying don't vote, you know, and I have a well-established record about my views about democracy and about voting and all that stuff, and I retract none of it. But if you're having an argument about political substance or political principle, and someone says, but it's a binary choice, how are you going to vote? I get the point that they're trying to make, but what I'm trying to make, the point I'm trying to make isn't reducible to a binary choice argument about voting. It's just an apples and oranges thing. And again, apples and oranges are really similar, but they are different. And I find that this is my problem with Tom's position, is that it felt to me, and again, this might be entirely my fault for not articulating these distinctions well enough. I don't know if I'm articulating them now well enough, but Tom kept going back and forth across these lines between how you should vote, how you should think about your vote, who you should vote for, and what your actual positions should be, and what a good sort of strategy should be about politics in general. And those are just three different things. And they all have their justifications. They all have their merits, but you can get yourself into a mess. And I do it all the time. It's a very common, problem, but you can get yourself into a mess if you aren't aware or cognizant of or careful about being clear about what mode of thinking you're doing at the time. And again, it's like the Pence pro-life thing. Pence is a sincere and passionate pro-lifer. I'm sure he doesn't want it to be true that being pro-life is bad for the GOP or has a downside for the GOP or has costs for the GOP. I think he's wrong about that as an analytical matter. And I think that being such a passionate pro-lifer might lead him to get his analysis wrong. Because for a lot of people, what is good for the GOP has to be all the right things, in the same way that the left thinks that what is good for the Democratic Party have to be all the right positions, and that there's no downside to taking any given position. And, a good sort of example of this is how that's wrong is campaign finance reform. Because, in the 1990s, the Democratic Party took a position on campaign finance reform that I don't think was actually in the party's self-interest, but they did it on principle. And the Republican Party took a position on campaign finance reform that wasn't in its self-interest, but was largely on principle. Or you look at Nancy Pelosi with Obamacare. I mean, now it's looking like Obamacare is popular. It's sunk in. People have reliance interests on it. It's a different topic. But she was perfectly happy to have Congress vote for Obamacare, knowing that it was going to cost a significant proportion of Democratic seats, including probably their majority. And she wanted to do it anyway. And I think there are real problems with that politically. And I can even make real argument that there are real problems with that philosophically, right? Because there's this tension there between what you're there to do. But if you're a true believer that this was the most important thing to do and it was good for the country, then it's worth taking a hit electorally to do the right thing. And she was willing to make that calculation. Of course, she was willing to gamble with other people's seats, not her own. But still, if you were a committed progressive, you would say kudos to her. And I just think that these distinctions between what is prudentially smart politics, what is partisan smart politics, what is philosophically correct political positions, and what is the truth, these things don't always line up as symmetrical lines in parallel. They're often knots. And everyone has got to figure out how to cut that knot their own way. I tend to like the way I'm trying to cut that knot. I think at the very minimum, it works for me. It helps me. I sleep at night pretty well because of these kinds of things, because of the positions I've taken. But there are a lot of people who sincerely believe, and I don't think they're entirely wrong, that Trump is such a disaster, such an objective threat to the country and to the constitutional order that, just telling the truth as you see it and not hectoring people towards one position or another position is morally irresponsible. And they may be right, but that's not the path I've chosen. And I don't think that reducing everything down to this sort of binary thing, the way Tom did, actually helps their cause. I think that you tell a lot of otherwise decent, wrong about Trump, but decent Republicans and conservatives out there, that the only way they can prove that they're actually morally ordered and patriotic people is by voting for Joe Biden and the Democrats, is an absolutely terrible political strategy. It's such a terrible political strategy. It actually violates the sort of standard of the intellectual to tell the truth as you see it, because it will not, as a matter of strategy, work.